In my first video reviewing LegalShield, we got a fairly decent response and there were some actually really interesting patterns in the comments, but fair to say that y'all want more of this, so we're going to talk about it again. Part 2 is today, and we're going to look at the exclusions of LegalShield. In other words, we're going to actually read the contract and see what it is that you're up a creek if you think you're covered and you've been paying for this coverage. After that, don't miss Part 3. We're going to talk about the one question that apparently these LegalShield people are all over the comments that apparently they're afraid to answer, and that if you're considering buying LegalShield or giving them your money, that you should probably ask this question. Then for part 4, we're going to talk about this 25% discount. You might not be getting what you think you're getting. With that, let's jump right into it. Now here's the document that I got all these screenshots from that I'm going to show you. It's a LegalShield plan overview. I'm not sure exactly what year this is from, but this is something that was publicly available. Let's start with one of the most common reasons, unfortunately, that people find themselves in need of legal help, and that's divorce. I want you to look at the highlighted text that I'm going to put on the screen here. For a contested divorce, separation, or annulment, coverage is capped at 20 hours. Now, to a non-lawyer, 20 hours might sound like a lot of time. In legal time, in terms of preparing documents, going to hearings, going to court, responding to opposing counsel, 20 hours ain't much. And if you know somebody who's ever gone through a contentious divorce, 20 hours, you're scratching the surface. Now, if you thought that's bad, it gets worse. Let's talk about enforcement and modification of child support. This is something that pops up relative to a lot of divorces. Not every divorce, but a lot of divorces do. I'm going to put the language on the screen right here. You're capped at 8 hours. So if you're fighting to modify a support order, to enforce visitation, to change custody, to get the other parent to do something, to go enforce that order, you only get 8 hours. That's, if 20 is scratching the surface, this is like tapping the surface. Now, one thing to note, it says it's covered if it's an uncontested divorce and all issues are agreed upon in writing by the parties. Now, I don't need to tell you that the number of divorces that start uncontested and get a little bit contested once it gets down to brass tacks, it's a lot. That's essentially asking you to work out the divorce yourself, and then they'll do a fill in the blank form. And honestly, guys, there's a lot of online services that'll do an uncontested divorce for you for a few $100. So let's look at housing. A lot of people sign up for these LegalShield plans because they rent. They don't own their house. They're paying somebody else rent. They're at somebody else's mercy, whether they change the refrigerator, fix the heating, or whatever it is. And a lot of landlords will be a little bit aggressive with security deposits depending upon the place. I want you to look at this language here. The service does not include attendance or representation at a trial or collection activities. What does this mean in plain English? This kind of means they're going to write a letter for you, and they might write some emails, and they might look at some documents. They're not going to go to trial. They're not going to go to hearings. Suppose you do get a judgment. They're not going to do collection activities. You just get a judgment from a court that says you win. Do you as a non-lawyer know what to do with that judgment that says you win? Do you know how to get rid of execution? Do you know how to go attach? Do you know the right order to do those things in? If you do, then you're in the minority, because I promise you that most people don't. So if you don't know how to do those things, and probably most of you don't, you're up a creek. You're going to pay for your own legal bill to go get that collection done. So let's talk about the next exclusion. One place that I would venture to say that most people are most likely to have bumped into a legal dispute or an incipient legal dispute other than divorce is probably contractors. The industry is rife with people who just take your money and disappear, or take your money and do 2 days of work and then disappear, which is why, by the way, I always advise my clients to never pay in advance. But let's suppose you did that. You signed a contract, you gave them your money, they did 2 days of work and disappeared. What's your remedy? Well, hey, you say, hey, look, I have LegalShield. I'm going to go after these guys. Guess what? I'm going to put the language on screen. This service does not include representation for construction, real estate, insurance matters, etc. I want you to think about that. This is probably, like I said, outside of divorce, this is probably the most likely place that you're going to run into potential litigation. Guess what? Totally excluded. No coverage. Now, here's an interesting exclusion when it comes to elder care issues, and I'm going to put it on the screen now. They exclude anything other than a simple will, and we'll talk more about that. They also exclude anything other than dealing with the primary residence. So if you want to deed secondary residence, a piece of property in some other state, an inherited piece of a farm that you got from great grandpa, too bad, not covered. Next exclusion, LegalShield really pushes their will preparation services, and we'll do a separate video on online wills and why a lot of those fail because of execution problems, but let's put the language on screen here. Estate tax planning is not included, and by the way, it gets worse. This service does not include tax advice, financial planning, etc. So if you have a simple estate and you're just ready to roll the dice on how it gets taxed, then great, you're good. But guess what? We're not just talking about estate tax planning here. We're talking about tax planning in general. So if you have questions about the step up in basis at death, oh, that's tax advice. If you have questions about whether a business should be given by the LLC or given by the will, or if it makes a difference, guess what? That's tax advice. That's a massive exclusion. And by the way, one of the biggest expenses that most people are actually going to pay on a regular basis. Also, another little interesting bit to notice about the wills coverage that I just put on the screen, it doesn't include any advice about assets outside of the United States. So guess what? All of my families who have assets in Texas and Mexico, who cross the border, who have business interests or family interests in both, tough luck, guys. The next one says that the provider firm will provide coverage for probate matters at a 25% discount. I want you to be very careful when you look at this wording here. It says they will provide advice, but the actual work, the actual big expense of probate is not covered. You just get the 25% discount, which, like I said, we're going to do a part 4 on. I think you're probably not getting anywhere near what you think you're getting with that, but the actual work of probate is not included. And by the way, that's the expensive part. Just giving you advice of whether, hey, this is a probate or it's not a probate, I could do that in 30 seconds, right? The actual expensive part, filling out the forms, getting all the required information, and showing up in the probate hearing. So essentially they're saying, well, we'll give you the cheap part. That's included, fine, no problem. But the part that's actually going to cost money, nope, excluded. And by the way, the other interesting exclusion here for probate is that the advice, consultation, and review only includes a will in which you are the named executor. That means if you have a will and all the named executors are dead, but you want to go probate it anyway, you're out of luck. If somebody died without a will and you need to do an heirship, you're out of luck. So let's look at the general exclusions list, and I'm going to put that on the screen here. For business matters, item 1, if you have a side hustle, an LLC, if you have rental income, just look at item number 1. Any matter arising from business matters or interests is excluded. So guess what? If you're self-employed, tough luck. Guess what? If you have a side hustle, tough luck. Guess what? If you have a rental property, if you're in a partnership with a friend, if you're one of the co-owners of a business, too bad. Now let's look at item 8. This is egregious. Employment-related matters. If you're wrongfully terminated, if you're harassed at work, denied benefits, they're not going to cover it. It's all excluded. And this is, again, I would say after probably contractors and divorce, this is one of the most common areas that people are going to run into legal problems at some point in their lives is employment matters. Excluded. All right, so I've done a couple of videos on small claims court. I'm going to put a link to a few of those there, but the exclusions that LegalShield has for small claims court are really interesting. I'm going to put those on the screen now. And this says that the service provides advice and document review for matters where he or she is the plaintiff. I want you to notice what it doesn't cover. It doesn't cover an appearance. They will sit at a desk and look at your documents, and they will talk to you and tell you how small claims court works. And in other words, they'll do just a little bit more than the YouTube videos that I just linked up there will do. They won't show up in court. They won't advocate for you in court. They're not your attorney in court. They're just advising you on the documents that you filed. I don't know about y'all, but if I wasn't an attorney, to me, that wouldn't be worth very much because that's what you have an attorney for, is to be your advocate in court. Now, now out of all of these, this is the only one that's like actively hilarious to me. This is to the point of ridiculousness. And I'm going to put it on the screen now. So this says that for personal injury matters, the firm may handle a personal injury matter on a contingency fee where you're the plaintiff. Number 1, I want you to note that it doesn't say they'll handle a personal injury matter where you're the defendant. So I don't even know if that's excluded or not. Maybe that's a future video. But let me tell you, if you're the plaintiff in a personal injury matter and you have real damages, I could find you 100 firms to do your matter on a contingency basis, right? Like if you have a good case, these guys will be lining up around the block to sign your case up so that they can do it on a contingency fee. This is not even no coverage. This is an advertisement in disguise, because there are 100 firms that if you have, like I said, if you have a good case, if you have a bad case, not so much, but if you have a good case, there are 100 firms that'll take your case on contingency. Next, intellectual property. If you're an inventor, you're an artist, you're a really smart chemical engineer, too bad, we're not going to help you with a patent. You're on your own. Hell of an exclusion. The next thing I want to look at here is their dispute resolution clause. And this is where it kind of really gets interesting to me. First of all, they have an arbitration clause for a company that trumpets access to lawyers and trumpets, we're going to provide you access to the legal system. Guess what? If you have a dispute with LegalShield, it's not in the legal system. They do arbitration. And of course, they're not going to pay for your lawyer to go sue them, which arguably I kind of think you should. And now here's one that really shocks me, right? Attorney-client privilege is one of the most sacred privileges that we have. This is one of the most sacred obligations of the legal profession. And I'm going to put this on the screen here. If you file a complaint about your LegalShield lawyer, you automatically authorize the provider law firm to share all communication relevant to the complaint. Quick version of this: once attorney-client privilege information is disclosed to a third party, there's a good chance that that voids attorney-client privilege entirely. So my conclusion here is, when you add up all of these exclusions, and by the way, the cherry on top, if you complain about it, you waive privilege. I kind of have to ask, at that point, what are you paying for? Now, I know some of y'all are thinking, okay, well, fine, maybe it's excluded, but at least I get the 25% discount, right? We're going to talk about that in part 4. And again, you may not be getting what you think you're getting. But before that, don't miss part 3, where we're going to go into some of the comments on the previous video, and I'm going to give you the one question that if somebody's trying to sell you LegalShield, you need to ask them. The commenters in my previous video, it's like I asked them this question, they disappear. I think the kids call that getting exposed nowadays, but I'm 40 years old, so what do I know? Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you like and subscribe. We'll see you all in the next one. Take care.